Hello, and welcome to First Service Residential's Board Brief, our series of short, informative videos you can watch on demand whenever you want and from wherever you'd like. My name is Anthony Grignano, and I'm a Vice President with First Service Residential High Rise Division. I'm happy to moderate today's board brief about how to conduct better association meetings as a follow-up to our most recent board certification course. Today's conversation represents perspectives from our panel of experts. As always, consult your association attorney to determine the best course of action for your association. Whether you're a new board member or a seasoned veteran, you recognize that effective meetings are vital to your association's success. Carefully planned meetings result in better decision-making, sound policies, and greater alignment among board members. However, meeting success depends on many factors such as well-thought-out agendas, properly prepared minutes, adhering to quorum rules, and much more. Joining me today to discuss, Michael Bender, partner at K. Bender Rembaum, Community Association Lawyers.
Hey, Anthony, thank you for having me. Look forward to our conversation and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys.
Glad to have you here. And Charity Gruelle, Regional Director at First Service Residential.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm also very happy to be here today.
Great. So with that, let's jump in. Michael, can you kick us off giving us an overview of the different types of association meetings, a little bit how they differ and why they're important?
Sure. So with I guess the meeting that most members are most familiar with would be board meetings. And so in the name, board meetings are meetings of the board of directors where your board members are conducting the business of the association. Communities, sometimes they'll meet monthly, sometimes it's quarterly, but essentially board meetings are when the board gets together to conduct their daily, weekly, monthly business for the association. Then you have membership meetings, and membership meetings, again in the name, they are meetings of the membership, and they differ from board meetings in that this is where the membership has, generally there's a subject matter of the meeting that includes membership participation by way of voting. Most obvious one would be your annual meeting where there's an election. There's a membership meeting. You have also, if you're doing votes on amendments, sometimes material alterations, those are all membership meeting votes. So you would call them a properly noticed membership meeting for that. And the third one that you might hear about, not as much as the first two, is committee meetings. And if your community has committees, typically those committees are created by the board, depending on what how your documents read. The committees will have delegated powers, and these could be executive committees or advisory committees. And executive committees are made up of a majority of the members of the board. Advisory committees can be made up of no directors, but essentially are in the name, again, they are advising. Best advisory committee example would be like your decorating committee. So those are, generally speaking, your three committees. And obviously, if you have further questions regarding more specifics or how these things are created or the proper format for them, you speak with your counsel.
Perfect. I appreciate that, Michael. And today, while we can spend probably hours talking about membership meetings, committee meetings, board meetings, we're going to focus in a little bit more closely just really on board meetings. And Charity, why don't you take us through, can you explain the purpose of a board meeting? What's the reason for it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So association board meetings, they provide a formal and more organized forum for the members to discuss. They can deliberate and have decisions on matters related to the community. Also, in order to have an effective board meeting, you must have an agenda. And on that agenda, you want to put items that you're going to have for consideration of the board to review. I highly, highly recommend that when you have the agenda set forth and you are in the forum of a board meeting, that you stick to the agenda items. We do recognize that you may need a little flexibility, but if you do come off of that agenda item, we strongly encourage you to jump back into your agenda item to make sure you have the most productive meeting. Another big thing is the board should definitely establish some sort of guidelines for their board meetings. They should have good conduct rules. They should implement that you ensure respectful and a very productive environment. So in most cases in a board meeting, you want to make sure that the owners and the residents that are in attendance, they know what those guidelines are. It's equally important to send out the agenda in accordance with either your governing documents or Florida statute. You want to make sure you have it out in accordance with those laws. and even e-blast it or email it out to your community to make sure you can maximize your participation with your residents. Also, in some cases, you may need a certain amount of a quorum for your board. So we want to make sure that the board is well versed in what the quorum requirements are for that. Establishing specific time constraints for each agenda item is very, very important. This allows you to not prolong the meeting. I think we all may know that if you're in a board meeting much longer than an hour, it loses productivity. So we want to make sure that we're maximizing the productivity in every board meeting.
No, those are all great tips, right? And Michael, as I always say, a board meeting is meant just that. It's a time that, according to statute, boards cannot make decisions behind closed doors, right? For most things. So being out in the open, it really is, while the membership has the ability to hear and listen, it is a time that the board gets together and has their conversation. And
Right.
yes, the membership gets to participate, but it's limited because I find so many times boards miss out on that a little bit.
Right, yeah, and again, and your role as the managers is exactly, it's the tough role of trying to keep everybody on task in that regard. But you're both spot on. Charlie, those were great points, and you're spot on. And I guess the key here is what board members have to remember is membership is allowed to attend, and they are allowed to participate and share their comments or thoughts on each agenda item as they come up. To Charity's point about guidelines, I want to emphasize that because the importance of having guidelines in place for the conducting your meetings, all meetings, but in this case, board meetings, is helpful. The board has to properly approve those at a board meeting, a 48-hour notice board meeting, and share them with the membership, and then have them at the door for anyone who comes in. And while most meetings when the board is conducting its meetings, it wants to be able to control the meeting by handling its business around the table. A lot of times you'll see boards have straight tables facing out to the audience, right? Because they're communicating, but really it is a board meeting and it's the board conducting their business. The membership's welcome. You can listen, and at the time that we give you the floor, you'll have the floor. So I suggest that boards consider a U shape so that they're talking to each other, still open to the membership, but talking to each other. But, as far as notice requirements, you touched upon this, depending on the content of the meeting, you do want to make sure your notices are proper. Most board meetings, whether you're an HOA or a condo, can be 48 hours. Posted notice in the air conspicuously. Both do need to now have agendas listed, including the HOA. That was a change in the law last year. You now need to list agenda, which makes sense to both of your points earlier. In order for the membership to know, what are they going to talk about today? Do I want to come? Listen, participate. You're supposed to give agenda items which give an idea of what it is. Certain meetings, though, will require longer notice, will require a minimum 14-day notice. Simplest example is if you're going to be approving a special assessment. That's your best example. If the board's going to approve a special assessment when the board is adopting budgets, those tend to be 14-day notice. Now, condominium, if you're in the condominium, that's a creature statute. The statutory requirements are very specific. The HOA Act, actually meeting notices will be set forth in your governing documents. If they're silent, you're going to defer to what the statute says, which is your 14 days, as I was discussing. But if you do have any questions, and I talk to your managers too, especially with notices that are 14 days, I encourage your boards, your management team to get with counsel, if not to draft the notices, to at least review the notices to make sure they're done properly. Because if you have a 14-day notice meeting that has some kind of unintentional defect, having to start that process over is not something anybody wants to do.
No, absolutely. So touching base, just, we've talked about sort of notices and different 48-hour notice, 14-day notice. And again, always rely on your attorney because I know some documents require sometimes a 30-day notice around some. I know some of my older declarations require 30-day notices around some meetings. So again, always relate back to your association attorney, especially for those longer notice periods.
Mm-hmm.
But along with that, what constitutes a quorum for a board meeting, right?
Yeah. Well, a quorum at a board meeting would be a majority of the seats. And I just had this right before we got on. I had a call from a client. They said, it's a 7 member board, but they only has 6 people run and they have 6 seats filled. So they're questioning what's the quorum requirement. And I reminded them, I said, the quorum requirement is based on the number of chairs around the table, not the number of seats, butts in the seats, essentially. So if you have 7 seats around the table and only 5 directors, you still need 4 of those 5 to show up to establish quorum. It doesn't go down to 3. Only if in your documents you have the ability to reduce the size of the board from 7 to 5. And if you properly do that, now you're a board of 5 and your quorum is 3. But you need to look at the number of seats around the table, whether there are directors sitting in those seats or not, because some certain seats are vacant. That's how you establish what your quorum is to be able to conduct proper business.
Perfect. And then with that, because I always get this question as well, right? So you're a 5-member board, 2 people don't show up, so you have 3 people now as a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
Does the majority still rule that now 2 out of the 3 actually make the decision for passing a motion?
Almost every time, yes. I mean, there might be rare occasion where documents require a full board vote. But in general, if it's in your example, you're exactly right. 3 of the 5 show up, you've established quorum. 2-1 vote would carry a motion.
Right, because that's I always get that question sometimes. That means really 2 people can decide a decision when there's really 5 people on a board. So just remember that, and as we move forward. So Charity, we've talked about now different types of meetings. We've talked about how do we manage those meetings, set them up a little bit. What's some of the best practices about now preparing for these meetings, right, as management and as the team?
So quite a bit goes into preparing for the actual meeting. And with that is assembling the board meeting packets. In some cases, we do it by binder. We may do it by some type of a binder sleeve. Getting together if there's any bids, any proposals, anything that the board needs to discuss. As we know, we're dealing with a lot of engineering type stuff and the SIRS and things like that. So anything relative to board business or association business will be placed on the agenda. Really understanding what the board's goals are for that board meeting. Also making sure that we're sending invitations and coordinating with other schedules that we're going to have in attendance. And what I mean by that is it could be resident experts. It could be our, first service financial coming in to give a banking analysis or discuss loan that they may need, things like that. An engineer, maybe Michael's firm to come in and clarify some legal things for our board and for our residents. Also ensuring that you have some snacks. I also encourage boards to have a vendor come in and potentially sponsor your meetings, so that you can get some snacks. And it's also important to make sure, to my point earlier, that you give the proper adequate notice. And I think if you use all the outlets available for first service, we can e-blast it, we can, text it, we can do our one call, and then also posting it in accordance with their documents. The more information you get out to the community, the most likely you're going to have participation. Also, just being familiar with the participation guidelines. We were just talking about quorum requirements, and you always want to make sure prior to even scheduling the board and getting the ball rolling that your board members are available and there will be a quorum present. There's a lot more that goes into actually scheduling the meeting, but prepping the board packet is probably the most important. And then just pushing your board a little bit to make sure that they're reviewing the information prior to the meeting so that we can have a very, very successful meeting.
No, all great points.
There's that last one especially, because that's what I tell board members. It's important, the packages are being put together. It's important you review them. Practically speaking, it would be illogical and impossible for a board to get all the work done if they first look at their package when they sit down at the table. You would be there for days. So it's important you guys go through that effort and you put everything in front of them. So having them review it. And I want to reemphasize too, you were talking about the quorum requirements. And I want to make sure that your managers and your board members recognize if you do not have quorum of the board, then while you can have good and welfare, you can have conversations, you cannot conduct any official business. So, so you can't decide we want to change the rules at that moment. So be aware of your notice requirements and make sure then that if you have a quorum, you have to have a quorum of the board present before you proceed with your agenda officially.
All great points, right? And I agree. board package, the board reading the package prior, management getting all the detailed information. And the one thing I always stress, use your experts, right? Boards always want to be the one that sort of convey information, but it's so important, especially now, construction projects or engineering issues or, design. Bring your professionals in to have that conversation. Lean on your attorney to come in. So many times those are missed opportunities where you're having a tough decision to be made and the board may be briefed on it and understand it, but let the community hear from that expert. And respecting everyone's time is my other major recommendation, right? Like Charity said, keeping it to an hour and a half, you start to lose people's ability to keep through and engaged for long meetings. So,
and if you bring experts in, try to do their stuff up front.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. Get them in and out so that you can finish your business.
Correct. And recently, to your point too, very recently, there, as you all know, there's been a lot of, with construction products, there's been a lot of loans. And I'd suggest, and insurance issues, bring your insurance advisors, your insurance agents in meetings, let them be the ones to explain the do's and don'ts, the pitfalls or the good and the bad and the ugly. I've had recently a couple through a couple of Zoom, by Zoom or in person, bank representatives coming to answer questions. I answer the questions too, but when they also hear directly from the bank on the business side, it also further supports. So that really does help your managers and your board members in conveying. And I think to all of our points, it's what we're, as board members, you want to be communicative. Cherry, you mentioned that word communication. I can't underline that enough. That really, I think, brings a sense of, hey, members, we're sharing with you the information we've got directly so that you can ask questions and we can work together as a community. Because something I always point out is, even though you're sitting there at the board table and you're the one making the tough decisions, you still are an owner. And every decision you make impacts you the same way it impacts everybody in the audience.
Absolutely. So now we've talked about the meetings, setup of the meetings, all the different items that go into it and the preparation. So how do we now record what happened at the meeting, Michael?
Well, obviously we're talking about minutes.
Yep.
And it's important to remember when you are conducting your board meetings, you have the minutes are not meant to be a transcript. Generally speaking, when you would create your minutes of the meeting, the date of the meeting, the time it's called to order, who's present, the directors that are present, if there's any directors not present, you can make a notation, directors present in person, directors present either on phone or virtually. And that was something I wanted to also mention when we talked about quorum. If you're having trouble establishing quorum because directors can't be there in person, remember, telephone call, you can call in on a speakerphone, you can be on a virtual and that qualifies as a director being present and the ability to vote and establish quorum. But the minutes then would reflect, then you get into your agenda. And of course you've notations, notice of the meeting was documented. If there's any guests, you might list that the guests that are in the meeting, like the experts that we talked about. And then the agenda. And the agenda, really, you're going through each item, and the item, and again, I'm speaking generally, but the item essentially says, there was a motion made to XYZ, made by this director. It was seconded by this director. Discussion followed. And then the vote on the motion is as follows. It's unanimous. It's unanimous. If it's not, the minutes are reflecting the motion passed 5-2 with Directors Smith and Jones voting against. Because again, if you've listed your minutes correctly, it's going to list which directors are present. By listing those who voted against, obviously we know who voted in favor. With rare exception, are you highlighting more than those actions that are taken? If you have there might be specific instances, and you'll review them with your business advisor, your management team, and your legal counsel. But I just want to emphasize, I see all too often, Charity, you can get into this, I'm sure you see it even more than me, when minutes are being that John said this and Susan said that, and they responded, and then they did that. That's not how minutes should reflect at all. It should not be a transcript.
No,
I agree. And that is a practice that, we keep at First Service too, is we make sure that we're only doing those motions and actions.
Right. And minutes have to be retained forever now. Change in the law. So minutes have to be retained indefinitely. And so keep that in mind. It's no longer the 7-year requirement. It's indefinitely.
Now, Michael, I have a quick question on that others may have a question on as well. When the law changed and allowed you to dispose of them, and they were disposed when there was only the 7 years. How does that work now that it's indefinitely? Those that have been disposed, obviously, is that grandfathered in?
Well, yeah. Again, if you, I forget what year the law changed at this point. I think it was 2018, and I believe that was in 718. I'm trying to remember if they even made the change in 720, but you can check with your attorney. Or call me if I'm your attorney and I'll confirm it. So let's say it's 2018. So you should have minutes going back to 2012, if I'm doing the math, 12, 13, 14, like that, to 2018. So if you got rid of minutes 2011 and earlier, you're not going to have any problem if you don't have them anymore, because you were permitted to only keep 7 years worth of records. If that's your question, going forward, if you have them, I would keep them. But I wouldn't need, there's no need to discard older minutes if you have them already. But certainly, based on what the law change, the minutes from 2012 forward should be permanently retained.
Perfect.
And then just one other item around minutes, because I know sometimes managers will record a meeting to transcribe and make sure they have the right motions. What's your opinion in regards to that recording, right? Does that become the official record? Can it be discarded?
Yeah, well, in my experience, there are boards that will record meetings, and they do that so that the individual who is writing up the minutes can ensure that they have it done accurately. And that's fine. If that's necessary, I have no problem with that. But if you do decide to retain that recording does become part of the official records, open to inspection, open to copying. And for the same reason, we recommend that minutes not be transcribed as a transcript. It's a lot of T words I just used. The same reason not to have to retain the recording. So my recommendation is, if you record, to make sure you can get the minutes correctly. Once you have the minutes done, then you erase that and record the next meeting over it. And then they're not subject to being part of the official records.
Perfect. And in this new day and age, everyone, just like this, right? We're on Zoom, and technology has driven a new path over the past few years. So how does that work in condos and HOAs when we talk about virtual meetings?
So is that one for me? Sorry.
Go ahead. You can.
I was going to say, Florida law, it does allow video conferencing for association members and board members, but we strongly recommend that you keep the meetings to hybrid meetings, so that there's both a physical location and a virtual platform. And the participants that are going to be on these meetings must be able to verify that they are a member. We also strongly suggest that the board adopt guidelines in order to have a structure and state, what their guidelines are for the virtual and the hybrid meetings. We should also be sharing the agenda for any relevant documents in advance, just like we would if it was only an in-person meeting. And then we also encourage that, you provide specific opportunities to the homeowners to ask questions at the end, and the proper position of the agenda. I'm sorry, Michael, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. I was good. Well, from the legal side, which obviously is sharing, is that if you are going to hold a meeting, a board meeting, if you're saying, hey, we're going to do a board meeting virtually, I agree. Our recommendation is that you have an on-site location, whether it be physically on your property, whether it be in the management company's office. As long as it's within the proper distance of where your community is located, that there be an opportunity for any member who claims, hey, I can't get on virtual, whether it's Zoom, Teams, whatever it is, because I'm not getting service in my unit, my phone is dead, or whatever it is, that there is a physical place that they can go where there would be the virtual setup. Or in hybrid situation, it might even be where there's a board member or two sitting somewhere, and the other board members are all on Zoom in this case. And so and that just eliminates the complaint. And I know none of your communities have owners who complain, but in the rare instance where an owner might complain about something, that kind of undercuts that issue. And I just would highlight, if you're doing virtual meetings, and I know we're talking primarily board meetings, but I do want to highlight, if you're doing a virtual meeting for a membership meeting, Chapter 617, which is your not-for-profit corporate act, and does apply the HOA, the condo, the co-op, all of them, that does have language in there that specifically requires a board at a board meeting to announce that you're going to hold a membership meeting or membership meetings virtually. and that you have to provide as part of that resolution how you're going to run those membership meetings virtually. So if you are planning on doing Zoom meetings or virtual meetings of any kind for membership votes, that kind of thing, please speak to your association council and get proper guidance on the way to go about doing that. And so that makes the life of your management team and your board a lot easier as well if you do it in advance.
All great insights, right? So, Michael, I am going to ask you one last question that I think can, on a lot of minds, right? And again, this is probably a whole nother segment that we can talk through, but I got to ask it. Closed door board meetings.
Okay. All
Just what's allowed, what's not allowed, because so many people go, oh, we're going to go to an executive session or we're going to talk. So just real briefly, what are those options that boards have or are legally allowed?
And this, if we're talking both 718, which is your condo act, and 720, your homeowner association, like they both are pretty much on point the same way. Boards can close meetings, meaning without inviting the membership into the conversation, in two instances. The first instance would be when you invite legal counsel to meet with the board to discuss either proposed or pending legal litigation type matters. Okay. The second is where you don't need counsel present, is when the board is going to have a closed meeting to discuss personnel matters. And again, I would encourage your board members, your managers to reach out to association counsel. Hey, we want to have a particular meeting. These are the subject matters. Is this something that we can have a closed meeting? Is this something that would involve the council being present or not being present? Just to get clarity on that. Reminder though, even if it's a closed meeting, notice should be posted in a timely fashion, except if there's an true emergency situation, which doesn't allow you to give 48-hour posted notice. There should be at least 48-hour posted notice where you're going to have a closed meeting with counsel to discuss pending litigation, or a closed meeting with counsel closed meeting to discuss personnel matters. It's all the notice needs to say, but there should be notice up and documented that it was noticed.
Perfect. I appreciate that high-level recap on closed door meetings. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for their time and both of you for speaking with us today. We've covered quite a lot of bit of information and value the insights that have been provided. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on this segment of the Board Brief, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.